Welcome back to my channel and happy Halloween. Today we're going to be talking about a film from much earlier in the year, and it's one that I've been saving for just the occasion. It's called Verotika. Before we begin, let me know in the comments if you were looking forward to this or what your thoughts were if you've seen it already, and make sure to give this a thumbs up if you like these reviews. It helps me out immensely if you do that. Also, if you're new here and you like movies, whether it be blockbusters, hidden gems, or everything in between, please consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases and some classics. But now, let's jump right into it. This is written and directed by Glenn Danzig, and if you're not familiar with who he is, he's the lead singer of the punk rock band The Misfits, as well as his own heavy metal band called Danzig. Both bands usually cover horror-related topics, with The Misfits in particular singing about Martians, vampires, zombies, and all sorts of other creatures, with a heavy inspiration from B-movies. So this marks his debut as a filmmaker, and it sees him staying within the horror B-movie realm. It's an anthology movie that he's described as a tribute to other horror anthologies, such as Black Sabbath and Trilogy of Terror, and it's specifically based on comic books published by a company Danzig founded called Verotika, which is a combination of the words violent and erotic. So based on that alone, I'm sure you have an idea of where this is headed. It played at film festivals last year, and audiences were actually anticipating how one of the biggest staples in horror punk made the jump to the big screen. And according to the reports, 10 minutes in, people were howling with laughter. And what ended up happening is, Danzig essentially created the room of horror movies. It was 90 minutes of unintentional hilarity, which resulted in him calling the audience out in a Q&A after, saying they laughed in places where he wouldn't have. He took this incredibly seriously, and what happened is we now have the next midnight movie among us. This film's divided into three 30-minute segments, and before we go any further, I'm going to discuss spoilers for all three of them. That is the best way to break this movie down and review it. So if you want to know absolutely nothing about this going into it, then this is your spoiler warning. Though, I will also say that even with me telling you just about everything that happens here, that will by no means take away from the experience of watching this, because it is something else. So each of the three segments are introduced by Caden Cross as Morella, who's supposed to be this Elvira-type character. And the entire purpose of these segments is literally just to say, welcome to the movie, here's the next segment, and goodbye.
Welcome, my darklings. My name is Morella, and this is Verotika.
She's only in the movie for about less than 5 minutes. When she's introduced before the first segment, she's seen torturing this random girl by sticking her fingers in her eye before turning to the audience and welcoming them with this really flat delivery, then going right into the first segment. And in between each of these segments, she's seen holding some object related to what we just saw, though she adds nothing to this. It's just along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here, well, that sucked for that person, on to the next story, and we cut to the title card of the next segment. She otherwise serves no purpose. You could have cut her out entirely and just had the title cards, and you would have gotten the same result. The first segment is called The Albino Spider of Dejette. It takes place in Paris, where it focuses on a sex worker named Dejette who has, and I kid you not, eyes for nipples. Yeah. And within the first 10 minutes of this movie, the nipple eyes cry, and the tears fall on an albino spider that was walking around, and it transforms it into a giant humanoid creature with 8 arms who, for the remaining 20 minutes, proceeds to attack, torture, sexually assault, and kill people while she sleeps. How this got greenlit, I have no idea. So the one thing, and probably the only thing, I'll give Danzig some credit for in this segment is, with the sole exception of the spider pre-transformation, which looks horrendous by the way, he actually goes a lot more for practical effects over CGI. And that's something rare you see in movies, so I appreciated that. It's just unfortunate that it all went to waste on this movie, because it all looks terrible, with the humanoid spider creature in particular looking like a cheaply made Halloween costume. You'll get a lot of laughs from seeing this costume noticeably malfunction on several occasions, such as the bottom being clearly open in one scene, or most of the arms visibly not working. The acting by the guy playing the spider, though, is something to behold. He tries to sound menacing when he talks, speaking in what's supposed to be this very low growl, and he'll take deep breaths in between sentences.
First, I wish to bend you over right here.
As if talking like this subtly means you're taken more seriously. But honestly, he sounds like someone who just ran his first half marathon and has been trying to catch his breath the entire time. He talks like that through this entire segment. And it's hilarious, but maybe not as hilarious as the French accents used by everyone else. None of the actors playing French people are actually French. They're all American, and they were set up with a voice coach so they can speak with a French accent. And clearly, they need a lot more time with that coach because the accents here are so atrocious that I take Pepe Le Pew more seriously than any of them. The best way to describe it is, if you've ever seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail and know the scene of the French guard who taunts the knights, think that, except played with a straight face. It's embarrassingly awful.
T'as dit? Please, ma petite, do not cry. It's not worth it.
Mahia, it happened again.
It's especially comedic gold whenever we see the spider creature talking to Dejette in these scenes that are supposed to be like a person's conscious and subconscious talking to one another. The color palette will get a lot darker and the camera will tilt like we're in some warped dream sequence. And on one side of the room you have the spider talking in between these deep breaths. Try watching it without laughing. It's nearly impossible, and if you can, you deserve an award. Seriously. My absolute favorite, though, is when the public picks up on the fact that people are getting murdered by the spider, and the MO will be that their necks are broken. So there's a scene with a reporter, and he reveals the nickname for this mysterious neck-breaking killer as Le Neckbreaker, which I got nothing. Now, I know this has so far just been me making fun of this movie, and normally I try to give the filmmaker, the cast, and the crew some credit for trying, because they have the hard job of making something and putting it out there for all of us to judge. And as I said, Danzig took this completely seriously, but I'm sorry. While Danzig may be on top of the horror music world, when it comes to filmmaking, he clearly doesn't know what he's doing. With lines like the one I just mentioned, it's clear his script can barely pass as a first draft. And we'll discuss some of his actual filmmaking techniques in a moment. But it's also what he chooses to focus on where I think it's okay to make fun of this. Because, in all seriousness, while I'm always fine with over-the-top bloody horror movies or action movies, this is essentially laughably bad torture porn. Because in all three segments, he seems to have this fascination with exploitative sexual violence, as the title of the film suggests. There are scenes in all three segments where they serve essentially no purpose other than to just show off women in erotic clothing or show them half naked. Like there's even one scene in the first act where it's 2 or 3 minutes of Dejette posing with other women for this erotic photo shoot. And for the amount of time we focus on this scene, you think it serves some purpose, but it doesn't. I mean, for the amount of time Danzig does any of this, had he included maybe just a couple more scenes, it might as well have just been considered a straight-up porn movie, especially considering most of the actors here do work in the adult film industry. And I'm not criticizing that line of work specifically. I'm criticizing the fact that if you're trying to be taken seriously, but the entire purpose of your film is to show dragged-out scenes of uncomfortable sexual violence, or just have hypersexualized scenes that serve literally no purpose to the story, and then fail miserably at it because of your poor filmmaking skills or the terrible acting, I'm sorry, but you're gonna get made fun of for it. Because you're just trying to make people feel uncomfortable for the sake of feeling uncomfortable and failing horribly at it. Now that I'm done with that tangent, let's wrap up the first segment. After a few scenes of this spider attacking people, Dejette calls the cops on him while in her apartment. She then kills herself as the cops break down the door with a battering ram in the most unconvincing way possible. It's like light taps.
Let's go.
And it ends with this hilarious shootout where the cops just gun down this humanoid spider, which, by the way, it amazes me how it was just that easy to do. And then just casually talk over them like it's just another day.
She is dead.
So young, so sad. We.
Incredible stuff. After about a 30-second interlude with Morella, we then go to the second segment, called Change of Face. This focuses on a female serial killer who cuts the faces off her victims and pins them to her wall like trophies. If you've ever seen the 1960 horror film Eyes Without a Face, this will remind you of that film, and Danzig has stated he was inspired by it. That film focuses on a doctor whose daughter is horribly disfigured, which leads him to go to some extreme lengths to replace her face. It's an intense, unsettling, very nuanced classic horror film. To be clear, this has none of that nuance, especially because we never even learn why this woman does what she does. She's just a random serial killer. This time around, we're at least spared from the horrendous French accents, but that doesn't make the acting any better. The woman playing the serial killer tries to come off as cold and sinister. The first time we see her, she tries intimidating the woman she's about to kill, but she's just so emotionless that it comes off as totally flat.
Well, if you aren't gonna give it to me, then I'll just have to take it from you.
But it turns out the woman also works as a stripper and covers most of her face to hide her identity, which leads to what makes up the majority of this segment's runtime. We're given 3 separate sequences inside a strip club where we watch the entirety of a strip dance. These add literally nothing to the story, and I mean nothing. And one of those sequences had one of the biggest self-serving moments I've ever seen in a movie. Period. There's one dance that's set to one of Danzig's own songs called Eyes Ripping Fire, and it took me a second to pick up on it, but when I realized it was his voice, I burst out hysterically laughing for the remainder of the scene. This man definitely had some lifelong fantasy of his music being strip club music. There's no way he didn't, because that's the only reason I can think of why he bothered to include these very long, stretched out sequences, just to boost his ego. If you don't know his music, you may not realize it and may not find it as funny, but if you do pick up on it, it's comedy gold. It's also in this segment where I picked up on a few things that were present in the first segment, but are done to the nth degree here, and actually done for pretty much the entire film. It seems like Danzig doesn't know how to do a proper scene transition, because almost every scene, if not every single scene, he does one of two things. Danzig leaves the camera lingering on a character after they said a random line, and the scene will fade out. Almost every scene is a fade out. There's never a cross dissolve, and there's never simply just cutting to the next scene. It looked okay maybe once or twice, but it's like he didn't know what else to do. Sometimes the scene is less than a minute long, and he'll transition by fading out. Once I realized it, I felt myself getting angrier and angrier, because he's relentless with it. It's so repetitive. At one point, I yelled at my screen, "Oh my god, just stop!" And the way in which he leaves the camera on the characters after they say their line, again, it's like every other scene. They'll say something, and then they're not sure what to do, like they're waiting on Danzig to yell cut and just staying in this one particular position for like another 10 to 15 seconds, maybe even more. You could just tell from the look on their faces, they're so confused. And it's not like they're saying anything particularly insightful. Sometimes it'll just be a normal conversation. One of the most egregious examples of this comes when we see a detective at the crime scene from the segment's opening, and he and his colleagues are looking down at the body, and there will be these long, awkward pauses between sentences. It's like they're trying to sound tough, but they're so socially awkward at the same time.
What do you got?
What we got is grizzly, Sarge.
Oh, yeah? How grisly?
Pretty grisly. Face cut off, ear removed, no sign of any other body trauma.
There's one moment especially where they finish their conversation and then the camera stays on them as we watch one of their colleagues finish a donut for like 30 seconds while they drink their coffee before he goes over to cover up the body. Nothing else happens but just this static shot of a guy eating his donut. Once again, I burst out laughing. One other thing worth noticing is anytime we're at this particular setting, there's a light shining in the background, and it causes two lines of light to go through the shot, and it'll cut out a little bit of the actors. And it isn't like a one-time mistake or anything. It's any time we're in this one particular location. And again, because Danzig just lingers on some of these shots for way too long, we'll have 10 to 15 seconds where nothing's happening and we have this light staring us in the face. Now, the detective, who tries to imitate the hard-boiled detective trope but winds up sounding like a cartoon character, manages to put the clues together and knows the killer is at the strip club. It leads to a chase sequence where he confronts the killer in this random dark room where all we ever see are the two of them in extreme close-ups. And she shoots him non-fatally, and he declares that he'll one day find her. And spoiler alert, even though I said that at the very beginning of this video, we cut to 6 months later where we get another scene of this woman at a different strip club, and she's never found by the detective. And there's a dance, and the segment ends, and it gives us the most anticlimactic ending of all three stories. Now, while this film has so far been nothing but an absolute train wreck, neither of these two segments come even as close to being as bad as the final segment, Drukija or Drukija, Contessa of Blood. This was based on the crimes of the 16th century serial killer Elizabeth Bathory, and all it is a female serial killer who, similar to Bathory, horribly mutilates and tortures random women before sadistically killing them. And that's it. That's the entire segment. 30 minutes of this woman grotesquely stabbing other women, rubbing their blood on her face, bathing in their blood, nothing else. No conflict, no story, little to no dialogue, absolutely nothing of merit here. If you thought the other two segments weren't torture porn, there's no disputing this is, because this is by far the most disgusting of all three segments. Though it's also not without its unintentional hilarity. Once again, this is chock full of Danzig's frequent fade-out scene transitions, which are used so much by this point that I thought I was going to have an anxiety attack. By now, it really started to bother me. Then, there's another 5-minute sequence, maybe a little less, where the Contessa checks herself out in the mirror and bends forward and leans in multiple times for literally no reason. It's a full-bodied mirror where she clearly sees herself standing up straight, but anytime she goes to touch up the remaining blood on her face, she bends and leans in, and I couldn't for the life of me figure out why. It was really strange, though nothing tops the final sequence where she and her servants publicly execute a woman by beheading her. And and we get the most cartoonish looking prop in the entire movie, which is the disembodied head, who the Contessa holds up and stares at in awe. The eyes on this thing are made so wide, I thought they were going to pop out of its head. And it still moves its mouth slightly, but it'll be timed to look synchronized, and it's so robotic that I buy the giant spider from the first segment as looking more real than this. Hell, I've honestly seen animated movies that look more realistic than this. It's just, once again, hilariously awful. I don't have much else to say about this segment because, honestly, nothing else happens. At least there was some semblance of a story with the other two segments, but this is just a day in the life of this serial killer. It's truly a low point in film, if I've ever seen one. After this woman surveys all the other women she beheaded, mounted like trophies, it cuts back to Morella one last time, where she's also bathing in blood, and it cuts to the credits, and that's the movie. So I think it goes without saying that this is terrible, like from front to back. Everything from writing, directing, editing, acting, all terrible. I think it'll find its audience as a cult movie for being so bad it's good, because as I've said, there were multiple times I burst out in hysterical laughter over some of the things they do. You may have the same reaction as me, or you may just find it awful, period. I don't know if it's something I'd personally rewatch anytime soon, but I had a good time with it. Though if you're gonna watch it, it's actually on Shudder, so if you have that, just watch it there. Personally, I wouldn't say pay for it unless it's gonna be the new staple at your Halloween parties or something and you want to laugh hysterically at something so awful. But either way, it's not only one of the worst movies I've seen this year, but also earned its place as one of the worst movies of all time. Danzig should just stick to music. Verotika gets a 0 out of 10. Well, I hope you enjoyed this Halloween special. I had fun making this, so I hope you're able to enjoy your Halloween given the circumstances this year, and stay safe. Let me know what you thought of Verotika in the comments below. Plus, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll catch you next time.